Hey everyone, my name is Jaclyn. I'm the clinical dietitian. I have some education here and we'll get started right away. This is diet textures and thickened fluids and a little bit of dysphagia background and explanation. So with that, let's get started. Okay, so we will briefly explain and go over dysphagia, talk about the role of nutrition and food service in dysphagia management, a little bit more about understanding the importance of proper diets, review the texture modified diets. There's a few new ones and changes with that, so we'll go over that, review the thickened fluids, and a little bit about, we'll talk about how to prepare thickened fluids and modified texture diets. Dysphagia is a fancy word for a swallowing disorder, so it's difficulty moving food from the mouth to the stomach. It can occur at different stages of the swallowing process. If you look at these pictures, there's an oral phase, a pharyngeal phase, and an esophageal phase. So dysphagia can happen at any of those moments. Common causes of dysphagia could be stroke or dementia, Parkinson's, Lou Gehrig's disease, or multiple sclerosis. Surgery to the head, neck, or GI tract, and or from a cognitive or speech impairment. Major concerns for dysphagia would be aspiration. So that means food or fluid is going into the lungs instead of the stomach, choking, malnutrition, or dehydration. The role of nutrition and food services staff in dysphagia management is to provide the appropriate texture and consistency. People are prescribed a certain diet, and it's your job to make sure that they get those correct foods to make sure that mealtime is as safe as possible. We want to provide meals in an appealing way and provide the diet to meet the nutritional requirements, accommodate preferences and cultural considerations as best we can, and to set up TCMDR test trays and SLP test trays, which I'll talk a little bit more about later. So we need modified textures to optimize nutrition and hydration for people who are at risk for choking or aspiration. These are the different diets that we have. There's a couple extra actually that I'm going to add in here. They kind of follow a continuum of hardest to manage to easiest to manage. So it goes regular, soft, minced, total minced, and pureed. The regular texture, I don't have a picture here, but it's just a regular texture. Everything is allowed on this diet. There's no limits regarding diet texture. So the first modified texture is a soft diet, and you can see in this photo that everything is like, the guide is that it should be fork tender. So that you could cut it with the side of a fork. I think most items on this tray, you could see, you'd be able to do that. So soft to chew or fork tender foods, items that are not fork tender should be minced or removed, and this diet includes no raw vegetables. So for the soft diet, the food must be soft and moist. So examples, fork tender or mashable foods like cooked vegetables, soft fruit without skin, most milk products, soft meats or entrees, soft grain products, salad type minced or cheese sandwich fillings are fine, regular soups are fine. And for this diet, we may need to add sauces, oils, butter, or salad dressing to moisten the foods. Sometimes you'll see in the diet order is extra moisture, and this is what we mean by that. Sometimes just adding those sauces or butter, whatever would be appropriate for that food. A minced diet is next, and on here, the biggest difference you can see is that the food on the plate is in minced form, and the bread has the crust removed. The general guide is that food must be 1/4 inch or less in size. Foods are moist, cohesive, and easily formed into a bolus. So if you think about eating rice, that's kind of a tricky one. When you do eat it, it kind of disperses in the mouth, and it's a little bit more difficult for you to kind of form that ball and for it to form before you perform the swallow. Certain foods are easier to form into that bolus. For the minced diet, all meat, entrees, and vegetables are minced. Soft breads and baked products are allowed, and there's no raw vegetables allowed on this diet. So this is a regular diet, but modified to include a soft ripe banana, regular soups, if the ingredients are less than 1/4 inch in size. So the soup could be, the dietary staff might mince the soup, or they might just puree the soup if it's not suitable to be minced. So whole, soft, moist breads and baked goods are included. There are no hard, dry, or chewy breads, and we remove the chewy crust if we're able to. Sandwiches are allowed with minced fillings or processed cheese, and again, with the crust removed. With a minced diet, extra moisture might be needed. High-risk food items are kind of as tolerated per individual assessment. A dry cereal and like a rice would not hold the bolus together well, and it may not be tolerated. So in order to combat this and make it easier, dry cereal could be soaked in milk or soda crackers soaked in soup. Now, in the total minced diet, everything is in minced form. The dessert often comes pureed, and the bread is missing. So we exclude all bread products from this diet. So it's similar to the mince, but the important differences would be no whole bread, baked products, cheese portions, or cold cereal. Other differences we'll highlight next. Meats, fish, poultry, casseroles, fruit, and vegetables are minced to that 1/4 inch size. Extra moisture might be needed. Soups are pureed or strained. Eggs are moist, scrambled, or pureed. You would not serve a hard-boiled egg on this diet. Bread products and baked goods are slurried or pureed, and pasta and rice dishes would be minced or pureed. And the next one is the pureed diet, and everything comes in a pureed form. Very smooth consistency. Again, no bread products here. So for the pureed diet, foods are mechanically modified by a blender or blixer for a naturally cohesive and moist homogeneous texture or a thick semi-liquid texture. It's free of lumps and bits. It holds its shape on a spoon, and little food left on the spoon, it cannot be sucked through a straw, and it's not sticky. So we exclude all kind of whole bread products and sticky foods like peanut butter, fudge, caramel, fresh bread. All allowed foods pureed in the blender or blixer. The liquid might be added to attain that smooth consistency. We have some other texture modified diets, the soft with minced meat, the blenderized, and the no fluids combined with solids. The soft with minced meat kind of combines the soft diet with the minced meat. So it is overall it's soft, but the meat item will be minced. We have soft to chew or fork tender foods. All meat products are minced to a 1/4 inch in size or less. Items that are not fork tender should be minced or removed. No raw vegetables, and extra moisture might be needed. And the blenderized diet is a little bit more of a rare one. I like to think of it as kind of a pureed diet that's been liquefied a little bit. It's a little bit thinner. We do have cases where a resident might need it thickened to a different consistency. So beware of that. But for the most part, it comes as a thin fluid, and it is able to be drank through a straw. So the consistency is thin enough to pass through a straw. It's smooth and has no bits. It can be eaten with a spoon or drunk from a cup with a straw. Cannot be eaten with a fork. It drips through the slots of a fork, and it does not hold its own shape on a plate. For the blenderized, all meats, grains, fruits, and vegetables are blenderized using the blender or blixer. Ready-to-drink foods are allowed, like a yogurt drink, a melted smooth ice cream, smoothies, milkshakes, nutritional supplement drinks, with pureed soups. Okay. Some food might be required to need a little bit of extra liquid, like a smooth yogurt, mashed potato, hummus, applesauce, a squeezable fruit pouch, pudding, or baby food. The no fluids combined with solids, it used to be called no mixed consistencies, but it does have a bit of a name change here. So it is a regular diet, but modified to avoid the risk associated with foods with fluids, thin or mildly thick, and solids combined in one mouthful. So an example of this would be cold cereal with milk. You have the cold cereal pieces with the thin milk. That is a fluid combined with a solid. Soup pieces with pieces of vegetable, noodles, or meat. Again, you've got your solid pieces and your thin fluid broth. Canned fruit with juice or syrup is a mixed consistency, and so would be frozen desserts with solid food particles. If you think of like a Dairy Queen Blizzard, if you're thinking about ice cream, which is a thin fluid when it melts, and the Oreo pieces, so that would be a fluid combined with a solid there. And we also include food, under this description, we include foods that release a lot of fluid when chewed, so watermelon, cherry tomatoes, or citrus fruits. The no fluids combined with solids, again, we would take a mixed consistency like a regular soup, and we would modify it to a blended soup or pureed soup. Fruit cocktail, we would modify it to a blended fruit. And it is just important to note that with that diet, sometimes this is generally combined with a different diet. So you might have like a minced diet with no fluids combined with solids. So in that case, we're kind of combining the diets, and then we would have to have these items would have to be like the fruit cocktail, for example. We could drain it really well, get rid of all the fluid, and mince the fruit cocktail, or we could blend it together and it would work. So you have to kind of use a little bit of critical thinking with this diet, is that because you're often combining two diets. It's not just this on its own for the most part. We want to watch out for high-risk food items for any of the modified textures. Sticky foods, these would be high risk. Peanut butter, fresh bread. If you think about eating a piece of white bread, it can often, or even a white tortilla, it can stick to the top of your mouth. So that can be difficult for people to eliminate and clear. So fresh bread, bagels and sticky buns, caramels, fudge, and butterscotch. These foods create a heavy bolus. They might mold to the airway. They are resistant to dislodging efforts. So if somebody is choking, it would be harder to clear. It would quickly fatigue already tired and weak muscles. Foods with stringy fibers are also high risk. Celery, spinach, broccoli, and asparagus. These foods require extensive chewing to break up the fibers, and they may enter the airway easily. Foods that might block the airway would be olives, citrus fruits, cherries, grapes. If you think about the size of a grape, it's exactly the size that could block the airway. Plums, hot dogs, or nuts. So these foods are difficult to manipulate, and they might enter the airway and fit really well into the airway. So we have to be careful with them. Foods that don't easily form a bolus would be raw fruits and vegetables, thin pureed fruits and vegetables, coconut, nuts and seeds, dry crackers, plain ground meats, bran cereals, plain rice, and hard candies. More hazards, like hazards from the other foods listed, foods that disperse easily in the mouth. They're difficult to manipulate with the tongue. You need moisture to form that bolus. They're difficult to chew. Again, it can really fatigue those tired and weak muscles, and they can easily get lost in the mouth. Foods that are not compliant with the no fluids combined with solids diet would be cold cereal with milk, canned vegetables, or baked beans containing liquids. Again, those foods that release liquid when we bite into them. Cottage cheese, if you think about that one, you have like the curds and then the thinner part of it. So that's a solid combined with liquid. Soups, regular soups, a jellied dessert with fruits or vegetables, and a dessert that would contain hard particles like candy, nuts, or granola. And again, these foods require that more of that blenderizing in the mouth. You have to work a little harder to kind of manipulate it, and it's difficult to handle the fluids while those solid pieces get lost in the mouth. So a good resource and what I use quite regularly is the Diet Compendium. It's a white binder located in the kitchen. It's a resource available for Southern Health, staff in the Southern Health region. It's also online if you have access to that, to the shared Southern Health website. So it's there, and we have a hard copy in the kitchen. We'll talk a little bit about fluids. They're grouped together based on their viscosity or willingness to pour. So again, it kind of goes in a compendium, we get thicker as we go along. So thin, mildly thick level 2, a moderately thick level 3, and extremely thick level 4. Thin fluids are, just regular thin fluids. So examples are apple juice and other thin juices, water, milk, broth, coffee, or tea. Some tricky ones are Jello, ice cream, sherbet, and ice chips. These all melt to thin liquids in the mouth, so they are considered a thin fluid. So we might need to thicken fluids for people, as thin fluids are maybe difficult to sense in the mouth. They cannot be controlled easily by the tongue for safe swallowing. A thickened fluid enables an individual with an impaired swallow a little bit more time to control and perform the swallow. This decreases the risk of fluids entering the airway and the lungs. No refills are allowed for thickened fluids. Coffee, tea, and all beverage top-ups would be unsafe for resin-unthickened fluids. If we're thinking about a thickened cup of coffee, you're not just going to pour more coffee into there because it would thin it out. So you would want to bring a new beverage thickened to the appropriate consistency, and you want to add in those condiments. Like if you're thinking about sugar or cream, you'd want to add that prior to mixing in the thickener. The mildly thick level 2 fluid does not drip off a spoon, but it flows slowly through without separating. It can be sipped through a straw, and examples that are naturally mild thick would be a buttermilk, eggnog, or tomato juice. We have pre-thickened fluids that are in containers, so that's really handy for staff to just be able to, it's ready to go and they can just pour it. And for individuals who might want a beverage that's not pre-thickened, then we have a thicken up clear powder that we use to thicken beverages. The moderately thick level 3 fluids drip slowly through the slots of a fork. Fluids that can be sipped from a cup, but not through a straw. This should be too thick to get through a straw. Fluids that do not drip from the spoon, but flow without separating. Examples of naturally moderately thick fluid would be honey, thick yogurt, or a tomato sauce. And lastly, the extremely thick level 4 fluids. These hold their shape on a spoon. It's not firm or sticky. There'd be little food left on the spoon if you drop it like in the picture here. So it must be eaten with a spoon. It'd be too thick to be sipped through a straw. Examples would be pudding or a thickened applesauce. So when we're preparing thickened fluids, you use a blixer or a blender. You process food when it's hot, and you want to separate the foods from each other. You don't want to be mixing all of your foods unless it is an already mixed dish, like maybe a casserole. You want to ensure appropriate texture and uniform consistency. When mincing, you pulse to mince the food into a 1/4 inch or less size. When pureeing, you want to mince food items first before adding liquid. Puree to a moist pudding consistency. Blenderize to a smooth consistency, thin enough to pass through a straw to achieve the appropriate consistency of a certain thickness level is needed. You want to scrape the lids and the sides of the food processor to ensure all ingredients are processed and incorporated into the mixture. And you want to check for proper consistency by ensuring that the end product is smooth, has no water separation, lumps, bits, skins, or hard pieces. There are some special considerations here. Reheating, using a steamer, microwave, or a double boiler on the stove. Do not reheat using the oven. When plating, minced, pureed, and blenderized foods must be separate. Use separate bowls or divided plates. Avoid mixing the food together. With garnishing, making things look a little bit better, adding moisture, like for this picture, they've got the mashed potato with gravy, a little bit of extra moisture there, a meat with sauce and gravy, vegetables, potatoes, or pasta or rice with margarine, sauces, gravy, or seasonings. When thickening fluids for commercial thickeners, you want to refer to the instructions on the thickener container for measurement amounts. Add thickening powder to a clean cup and then pour the measured liquid over top. Stir briskly until thickener is completely dissolved, about 20 or 30 seconds, and you want to make sure that there's no lumps. You might need to wait 1 to 5 minutes to allow the beverage to thicken to the correct consistency. It could take up to 15 minutes for milk. Just as a side note, that one takes a little bit longer. You don't want to add more thickener until you really allow it time to thicken up first. And you want to keep thickened fluids refrigerated until service. I mean, if it's a couple minutes, it's fine. You might just require additional stirring prior to service. So remember to thicken up soups as well as beverages, because we do have, regular soups have that thin fluid in there, so we'll have to add thickener to it. And if not, then it would come like in a pureed form. So it kind of depends on what the resident wants there and the other diets, modified diet that they might be on. So this is just the recommended fluids and thickener for texture modification. Kind of naturally things that you might use to thicken up something. So like a cream soup, bread, crackers, instant mashed potato product, cornstarch if it's used during cooking. For broth soup, maybe like a cornstarch, bread, crackers, instant mashed potatoes. Again, these things would just thicken it up naturally without adding a thickener. Oral nutrition supplements are prescribed by the dietitian, like an Ensure, Resource, or Boost. These are not compliant for people on thickened fluids. And it's just because the thickener doesn't properly work with the product to hold the right thickness that it's supposed to. It creates kind of lumps and bits that don't dissolve, and it's not super desirable. So if a resident does need a thickened fluid and a nutrition supplement, we often give fortified pudding or something that's already thick that we don't need to add a thickener to these drinks. Just a note for medications and thickened liquids, mix all liquid medications into applesauce. We don't add liquid meds to pre-thickened liquids or liquids already thickened, as it alters the consistency. Lactulose is mildly thick level 2. If you need it for other thicknesses, then you want to mix into applesauce. And the PEG is also, the directions are to mix into 1 tablespoon of applesauce. We don't want to add the PEG into pre-thickened fluids or attempt to thicken PEG mixed into a thin fluid. Patient safety is key. We want to ensure that proper thickness is given to prevent the consequences of over or under thickened fluids. If we're under thickening the fluids, it can cause fever, persistent cough, aspiration. Again, those thin fluids just going straight to the back of the throat and being aspirated on. It's hard for people to kind of manipulate that and control it. Recurrent pneumonia, it could cause a whole bunch of concern. So it's very important that we thicken correctly. And if we're over thickening fluids, this is also not good. It can cause malnutrition or dehydration, which would result in, constipation, UTIs, prolonged healing time, all kinds of different concerns, or dissatisfaction with meals. That can be challenging to be on a thickened fluid, especially if the person doesn't need it. So we want to get that right. We want to increase, it could also increase dehydration risk. So thickened fluids are more filling. Someone might dislike the look or the feeling of the fluid in the mouth, and it might alter taste depending on the type of fluid and the thickening agent that you've used, and have less opportunity to drink. We want to actively encourage fluid intake. It's very important to encourage fluid consumption, especially for those requiring the thickened fluids, just giving those frequent reminders to drink, and finding thickened beverages that the client or resident will enjoy. There's some different options. I know Cisco at one point had like a thickened iced tea, which was really nice. So sometimes we can find those different products that people do enjoy. The final messages would be make sure that we provide the appropriate diet texture and consistency so we reduce the risk of aspiration and choking. We want to present meals in a positive manner that promotes the intake and quality of life. Essentially feed the way that you would like to be fed. Adequate nutrition is important in patient or resident day-to-day functioning, and we want to adopt a multidisciplinary approach to dysphagia management, making sure that all team members are involved and are aware, kind of paying attention to what we should be doing to keep everyone safe. So with that is all I have for today. If you do have questions, speak to your manager or speak to myself directly. And yeah, that sums it up. Thanks so much. Bye.